Here is another essay, today's essay, continuing what we learned yesterday about the giving of the Torah. Okay, God gave the Torah, like we said before, so many times, and hopefully it's written in the history books, that at least the Jewish people claim something that nobody else claims, and that is that God, the creator of the universe, that's creating everything, every instant, actually appeared, took them out of slavery, a whole entire nation, and through the desert. And 50 days after he took them out of Egypt, he gave them the Torah. And what is the Torah? The Torah is God's will, God's wisdom, or in simple language, God. The Torah is God. The person's wisdom and a person's will, that's the person himself. So when God gave the Torah, he gave himself. So everyone knew that it was God speaking. And when you say the words of Torah today, you're saying what God is saying right now. So there's two types of speech. When God created the world, he created the world with his speech. And when he gave the Torah, he also did it with his speech. So first of all, it lets us know that God can talk. But God is not a person. God is not a thing. God does not have a physical or even a spiritual mouth. But he did create the world. And the whole process of speech by a person is that a person can even lie. Right? A person could say, "Who are you?" And I say, "Oh, I'm Abraham Lincoln. I wasn't really killed. Abraham Lincoln. I've been living in limbo a person can lie. You can say things that are simply not true. And so it is with God. When God spoke the world, when God created the world, he created, so to speak, a false world. What does it mean the world is false? The world is false because it presents itself to be the last ultimate reality. There's nothing more real than the world. That's what reality is. And just like you have a person, for instance, a person has a soul and a body, but the main thing of a person is his body. That's all you see. You see a soul. You can't see a soul. A soul is not anything. After a person dies, there's the soul. But you take the main thing is you bury a person. You bury Uncle Joe. You didn't just bury his body. You bury him. It's okay. The soul remains. But the same thing with the world. The world seems to be the real reality. That's what the world is. So that's a lie. The lie is that the world is not the way it is now. It's not it's not the ultimate reality. That there's a creator to the world, there's spiritual levels to the world, and the spiritual, just like a person, right? The spiritual aspect of a person is more the person than his body is. Right? His thoughts, his desires, his plans, his talents, his personality, his character. That's the person. So it's much more than just a body. It's more than that. So the world is a big lie. The world presents itself to be the only real reality. But that doesn't mean that it's a lie. That the world seems to be the only reality, right? And that there's no greater reality than it, that's the lie. But when we see the whole picture, why God is creating this world, which is called a lie, we realize that the reason is to transform this lie into truth, that eventually this physical world is the ultimate, greatest revelation of the Creator, infinitely greater than all the upper worlds that all the other religions are based on, even infinitely greater than spirituality. And that's what the Torah did. When God gave the Torah into the world, he put his 10 commandments into the 10 utterances that he created the world with. And that flipped the whole thing over. Suddenly the whole entire world, this physical world, if used properly, became higher than all the other worlds. What's the example? The Holy Temple. The Holy Temple was a building where it was higher than all the angels, higher than any of the other worlds, the Holy of Holies. And what was in the Holy Temple? The Torah. What was in the Holy of Holies was the Torah, the 10 commandments. And that was there. Okay, so it comes out that Judaism is trying to teach us that not just the giving of the Torah was unusual, and that Judaism has this really unique basis. Not just that is unique about Judaism, that it's the only religion that even claims that all of its adherents were once, slaves in some country, and that God himself took them all out with these big miracles, and he gave them his Torah, something that happened 3,000 years ago. It's talking about even what's happening now. And in fact, what's happening now is even higher than the giving of the Torah. What's happening right now is God is creating the world, and the world has the potential to reveal in it a level which is higher than all the spiritual worlds. Or in simple language, every second of our lives is an incredible miracle revelation of the creator of the universe, infinitely greater than going to heaven and all this other garbage that all the other religions talk about. Okay, even though that the fact is that the world has become so sunk into meaninglessness and sunk into this lie that anything seems to be better than it, right? That's what's going on in the college campuses, and the world has just sunk so deeply into this lie that all there is this world, and that there's no meaning and there's no plan, that, it's just so totally empty. They're willing to accept anything, At least the Hamas has some sort of a goal or something, so, So therefore, the poor Jewish people are like, sheep wandering around without a shepherd. But soon the shepherd will come, and that's the Moshiach, and he'll reveal that all these religions, Christianity and Islam and all these things are big bluffs, and that they're big lies, because this physical world is infinitely good, and every human being in it is infinitely meaningful, and every second is a big miracle. Okay, now the Rebbe is talking about like this. How big a lie is this world right now? How it is. So the Rebbe said, sure, the world is created. That's what the Bible tells us. The world is created from God's speech. Commercial dibur adam, like for instance, when a person speaks. When a person speaks, Shabatal Lagabi Makor Chutzpah, that his words are negated in comparison to, let's say, his thought, or even more directly to his voice, the voice which comes from his heart. Kach also also it is the same thing. Once again, let me make this bigger over here. 1 minute, bigger. What did I get up to here? What did I do? What did I do here? What happened? I lost my place. Big bad thing about the scrolling down is that once you scroll down, you're in a different world. Okay, so we said, this is Amitis Nikra Gadol. That's when God is called great. When is God called great? When he is in the city of God. What is the city of God? The city of God is the creation. But in regard comparison to God himself, God is not called great at all. You can only call God great in relation to us. God creates the whole world. That's great. That's amazing. But in regard to God's essence, as creating the world is the exact same thing as creating, one little pebble or something. Ani Hashem lo shenisi kasib. It says God is one. He never changed. Atu kodem sheni b'olam. So the Rebbe is trying to point out this amazing dichotomy between the world as it is now and the world as it really is. As the world is now, it's created from God's speech, and it's just like a ray of 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 a ray, a million times from God's essence. So it's watered down reality that's watered down to the point where we can't imagine there's any greater reality than this physical world. And some people come and they say, no, there's spiritual worlds also. But that's also a big bluff, because that's just a big creation. But nevertheless, when God creates the world, then we can say that God is great. Why? Because we say, you see this world. You ever learn about the angels? You learn about the cosmos, about the all the nebulae and all the different solar systems and that. Who's creating this? God. So, God is really great. So God is called that. What we can even call God great. That in a way is almost like they say an insult to God. Because in the place where you can call God great, Shamat Motzan Basnu, so this is really God's lowness, that he can lower himself down to create the world. Because God's reality is so infinitely more real than our reality. I mean, we can't understand what it means, different levels of reality. But it's something like a person sleeping and having a dream, and when he wakes up, all of a sudden he sees a different reality. Well, the fact is, what we're realizing, what we're in now, is also like a dream. And there's an infinitely greater reality than this world. And what is the greater reality than this world? This world, but in its true way, from God's point of view. But God is creating this world as it is now. He's creating it from his name. And God's name is elevated alone. Even God's name is higher than the world. So God's reality in comparison to the world is called great. But in its essence, it's not comparable to anything. So you can't even call it great. Rak hodu al eretz v'shamayim. Bechinas hod v'ziv lavad. Excuse me. Shemizgala bechinas metzius yispashtuso, that the world only reveals the fact that God spreads out and he creates, but not God's essence. Lo mahuto, because God's greatness in itself ain't cheker. And that's what it means. L'cha Hashem gadula. That's what it means to you. God is the greatness. That we're praising God and we're saying, God, your greatness is just an aspect, one of your aspects. Eino ola b'shem kol. But God, in God's essence, and there is no, you can't call him great at all. Okay, so that's how distant, if you want to call it, God, unlike God's reality is from this reality. Like for instance, a person, this is what we got up to. Just like the example, like a person when he speaks, so his speech is negated into his power of speech. Like for instance, a king, when an edict comes down from the king says, we're going to build a road in this place. So everybody starts building and building. The one word of the king makes 1,000 people work, 1,000,000 people work. But that's nothing compared to the king himself. The king has an infinite amount of commands that he can give. The king commanding, that's only to other people. As Eino Elul Havos calling himself. So therefore, God externally creates the world, but don't think from that you can understand what God is. Like it's no comparison to one word of a person compared to the person's character or his intellect. It's like, let's say I say to you, okay, I'm going to give you a hint. I want you to tell me when this word was said, who said it, the IQ of this person, how many children he has, a little bit about his past, a little bit about his potential. Okay, ready? Here's the hint. Ready? Listen. Want to hear it again? Hear what? What are you talking about? Just be quiet and just listen. Okay, now you have 10 minutes. Take your time. And I want you to tell me the IQ of this person, the person's age, his past, his family, his potential, his jobs. What can you possibly tell from one little? It makes no sense. Kach ein erech. So it is also, there's no comparison to the greatness of God, which just comes from two letters of God's name. What is it? Like it says, V'yud K Hashem Tzur Olamim. It says with two letters, God created the world. Yud, God created all the spiritual worlds, and the letter Hey, God created this physical world. Just like it is in God's greatness, so it is also in all of God's aspects, the heavens and the earth. So we can call God great, but only how he reveals himself into the world. And God's revealing himself into the world is like one letter compared to all the power of a person to speak in his whole entire life. So just like we cannot in any way tell who a person is from one letter that he says, we cannot in any way understand what God is from all of the whole universe, including the spiritual worlds, including the angels. We have no idea how real God is. So God is not a thing, and he's not a person, and he's not up in heavens and he's not separate from us and we're not separate from him. But on the other hand, God creates us. He creates us from nothing. Okay, so of course we can't understand this, but the fact is that it's true. Right? That's how the Bible, just to give you a small example, we talked about this before. The Torah starts off that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the Rebbe explains, and Chassidut explains in general, that what does it mean that before the beginning, there was nothing. There wasn't anything before the beginning. There was no worlds, previous worlds, and things like that. That's what it says there were previous worlds. It's talking about these spiritual levels, but that's not within time. That's not within time, within space, or within consciousness. Before the world was created, there was nothing. What does it mean, nothing? Nothing, we have no idea what nothing is. Nothing doesn't mean there was an empty space, a void, an ether. It means there was no being. There was no, so what about God? God is not a being. God creates all being. God is, but on the other hand, God answers our prayers. We're dealing with the God of Israel. We say every day, Ein Kelokeinu, there's nothing like our God. All of the other religions, they say God is some sort of a big, really big thing. Some sort of a thing. And he's up there and he's infinitely far from the world. And so, okay, whatever they things about God, and he put you in heaven, and you go to heaven, you see the Lord. Judaism is a totally different God that we're worshiping than any other God. Our God is infinitely more distant and far from human comprehension than all the other religions put together. On the other hand, he's simultaneously infinitely close to us, and he cares about this world infinitely so. That's the whole story of the giving of the Torah. So it is God's wisdom and understanding. Now, this thing you have to sit down after the class, or especially before you pray in the morning, and think about this a little bit. Think about this a little bit, right? You start to think, am I really being created by God? Right? Am I being created? If you start to realize a little bit, what does that mean? I'm being created by God. Then you've touched a little bit on the lowest of the lowest of the lowest of the aspects of God's infinity, if you want to call it, God's greatness that he creates. But what God is in his essence is infinitely more than that. And just very soon it's going to be revealed. I mean, the world is going crazy. What the world is going crazy, and everybody's going against the Jews, and the Jews are going against the Jews. And the whole thing is just total confusion. And God is going to have to just, change the whole thing around. But it's going to be different than it was going out of Egypt. Going out of Egypt, people didn't change their minds. Now people change their minds. We'll talk about it anyway. That's what Chassidut does. Chassidut wants to change our mind. It wants to open up our mind to understand that God is not what anybody thinks he is. Not what anyone thinks he is. All the other religions have little flashes of what God is. He creates the world. He listens to our prayers. Little tiny aspects of it. You know, like the thing about the four blind men telling us what an elephant is. One felt the trunk, and one felt the nose, the tail. Okay, but what is with God? Here we go. Well, like the rabbis say, Bereshis Naim Maimerhu. It says that God created the world with 10 utterances. He created the world. It says Vayedaber Hashem, Hashem's Elokim, Vayedaber Elokim. And if you count them, you'll see there's only 9. So it says the word Bereshit is also one God word of God. What does that mean? This is Chachma. This aspect of God's Chachma, which is the highest aspect of godliness above all the spiritual worlds, this is just a speech of God. Va'asiya, it's like God's action. Kimaimer va'asiya akol echad, because by God, his speech and his action are the same. So it's like you go to Albert Einstein and you say, can you show me your greatness? And he says, watch this. And he kicks a pebble on the ground. He says, there it is. So what type of greatness? Anybody can do that. Anybody can do that. I want some wisdom, something like that. He says, well, by God, his speech that he creates the world is the same thing. To God is kicking a little pebble. So the highest aspect of God that we can relate to is really, in fact, like the lowest aspect of God. Like it says, Baruch Omer Ve'oseh, that God spoke and he created the whole world. And another place it says that God created the world from Chachma. Chachma, that's the highest aspect of God. So the highest and the lowest, they're only aspects of God. The essence of God, God gave to the Jews. That's giving of the Torah. That's what we'll talk about. You can see if it says Hashem b'chachma yisad aretz, it says that God with wisdom founded the world. Shebechinas eretz, that the level of eretz, which is, let me just, somebody's speaker is on. Somebody's speaker is on. I'm going to turn that speaker. Nothing personal here. Nothing personal. There we go. There we go. Okay. Good. Good. Yes. Okay. So the 10 creations, the 10 word utterances that God created the world with, this comes from God's speech. This comes from God's speech. And the God's speech is the same thing as far as we're concerned as God's wisdom. Kamal Derech Moshe, for instance, a person, that a physical person, that when a person speaks, what does he do? He combines letters, and the ability to combine letters, that comes from the highest aspect of the soul, which is called Chachma. Shariatinuk, because a child, all the time that he hasn't got any das, that his mind is not developed, as he can't speak. That's what it means. In the beginning, God created the world. How did God create the world? How did God create time? How did God create existence? How did God create consciousness? It says this is what's called Chachma, with his Chachma, and God's Chachma is the same thing as creation. Just it's like, so the highest of angels to God is like a little, piece of sand or something other. Okay, but so what is God himself? What is God himself? There we go. Let's change the page over here. 1 minute, turn the page. Okay. Over Razal, the rabbi said that Breshit, like we said before, that the first word of the Torah is also an utterance of God. This is the beginning of all creation, Bereshit. And God is creating the world, not just that he created the world 5,700 years ago, or some people say 5 billion, or some people say 5 trillion, or 5 quadrillion, or 5 sextillion, whatever years ago. No, the fact is God is creating the world every instant, right now. It's happening right now. It began 5,700 and what is in 84 years ago and a half or something. That's when God. But before that, there was nothing. There was no worlds that came before. This world is infinitely, infinitely important to God, and God is creating it every single instant. And in order for God's speech to be drawn down and continue creating the world, or that there should be light, there should be a firmament, is it had to be this beginning revelation, which is Chachma in the general way. And then afterwards, it comes down also to the details. And that's the other 9 utterances that God made. And that's what all these Kabbalistic books talk about, these spiritual levels of creation, because creation is infinitely more complicated than we can possibly imagine. Like the human body, right? Human body. Who would dream that the human body is, right? Anatomy is so incredibly complicated, right? They have now this artificial intelligence stuff, and it's very, basically very simple. You just have like a motor and a computer inside, and that's it. And a human being is not only the human being is alive. There's nothing wrong. You want to buy a computer and smash it, you can smash it. Nothing wrong. God forbid to smash a person, you can't smash a person. A person runs on his own. It's incredible, right? Incredibly complicated. Well, man is made in the image of all the spiritual worlds. So the spiritual worlds are no less complicated than man is. And that's all these different levels and dimensions of creation, with all the angels that are in there, and spiritual revelations and chambers and things that all the Kabbalistic levels talk about this. But all of this is just creation. This is creation. What about the Creator himself? That's what happened when God gave the Torah. He revealed, let's go, here we go. Like the rabbis say, Bereshit, Bekadman, Romans, this is talking about the highest possible level of being that there can be. That's the Bereshit that God created the world, began creating the world from. This is what's called, excuse me, I'm sorry. This is called kadmos seichel. This is called the primordial intellect of God, machshava keduma, the first thought when it rose up in God's mind to create the world. Of course, this is I want to call it a spiritual level. God's will. Makar, the source to be the first wisdom of God coming into the world and creating the world. This is called Reshit. Okay, so now it gets a little bit complicated because we see that there is in fact a world. Here we are, and we believe that there is God. And the Rebbe is trying to tell us that it's not two separate things. If you say it's two separate things, then it's like the Wizard of Oz. You ever see the movie The Wizard of Oz? I remember when I was at the Wizard of Oz. They're looking for the Wizard of Oz, and they find that some guy sitting behind this in a room with a curtain, and he's got all these levers and things like that, and he's making all these noise with fire coming out. But it's just the same thing with God. God is like a big Wizard of Oz, and he's sitting up in the spiritual worlds behind this veil, and he's got all these levers and angels and things like that are doing all this stuff. And that seems to be the simple narrative of the Bible, that God is a figure and God creates all the other figures. And once in a while, he sort of like, the Iliad and the Odyssey, they got these big spirits in the sky that do all these things. Well, that's not so. That's not so. That's a lie. And in fact, that's idolatry. That's idolatry. To worship a person, to worship the Son of God, the servant of God, that's idolatry. You can't do that. You can only worship the Creator. And that Creator, He's the same Creator that took us out of Egypt. The fourth of the 10 Commandments is God created the world. And the first is that God took us out of Egypt. So that's who we're worshiping. We're worshiping the Creator that's creating us. And this Creator actually cares. Huh? So God is infinitely unlimited and not a person or any sort of level or whatever. On the other hand, God really cares about us. This is two total opposites, and that's the God of Israel. That's what's going to be revealed. Everyone's going to see how incredibly, all the non-Jews will see how incredibly important they are to God, that God is creating them. Every second of their life is very valuable. And the more human beings there are, the better. Okay, so that Chachma, the highest aspect of God, Chachma is the highest of the 10 spheres, is called Reshit. This is the beginning. This is only compared to us, which is not the case in front of God. Hari, God is infinitely higher than any of these levels that we want to call of Chachma or the beginning or Bereshit or the prime mover or all these things. This is like play stuff for God. This is like we said, like a person lying and telling a lie. Right? I'm Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, and I never abdicated, and I'm still the president right now. So what are you talking about? It's a lie. Well, this whole world is one big lie, the way it is now. But when we see why God is making this lie, then we'll realize that it's not just to get us out of the world into the upper worlds. The reason God is making this world a big lie because He wants us to transform it into the truth. The lie of this world is that we're looking at it in the wrong way. That even to call God wise, but not a known type of wisdom, nevertheless, don't think you can understand God in any way. Right? The whole idea of learning Kabbalah and all these ideas is to make you feel how small you are, how little you understand about God. On the other hand, to make you understand that you're very important to God. Right? And that God has given you the commandments and the Torah mitzvahs, you can make a connection to yourself, to the Creator. Okay. Okay, so there's no thought that can grasp God. We haven't gotten to the Torah yet. We're just talking about the creation. In other words, the Rebbe wants to shake us up a little bit to try to make us realize that we're sleeping. If we really think that what we see and what we are and what we are, that's reality, as the Rebbe said, you should know that all you see is 1/millionth of a billionth of a whatever it is of reality. And if you think that what we see is the truth, then we're paying attention to all the other, 999 trillion quadrillion lies. There's one little point of truth that's in this whole business. And that's what the Rebbe is trying to point us to. But meanwhile, the Rebbe is aware that we're not pointed to that. So the Rebbe is trying to point to us, our mind, to understand what really is reality. And that's the Torah of the Moshiach. we should be expecting this, and even more to try to sense it, what's going on in the world. It's not really relevant to call God by any name whatsoever. To say that God, you're the creator, you're creating the world. Because that God is creating the world, that is a very low thing for him. But, this low world, false, deceiving, mirage-like world that seems to be the real reality, this is what God really wants. This is what rose up in God's thought. That's the goal, is this physical world. Perish, what does it mean? As false as it is and as wrong as it is, it has the potential to reveal the truth, which none of the upper worlds have that potential. Only in this world can we serve God, and that's the purpose. That's the purpose of creation. The people should decide on their own free will to not think about themselves and to serve their creator, to recognize there is a creator first. Okay, ready? This is Perish Mashu, Reishi is that God is the beginning of revelation, that this is what we call Chochmah, that's the Bereshit. In fact, that's the end of the deeds of God. Therefore, it says, the Kadmid, Shu Machshava Kaduma, this is the first thought of the world. This is the source of all of the wisdom and the creation of all of the worlds. Okay. Let's want to do the summary. Let's do the summary. Kitzer. Beresha Ose Devorov Bahadar Lishmoa. It says the angels, they say, first we'll do what God wants and then we'll understand. And the Jewish people, before they got the Torah, they did the same thing. Inyan Matan Torah, that's the whole idea of the giving of the Torah. On every word that God spoke, their souls jumped out of their bodies. That's what it means that the world was created, only that we should fear God. That this is the whole purpose of doing the Torah and doing the commandments and why the soul came into the world. Namely, to reveal God's essence and how we have no idea what it is. But God gave it to us. That's called fear. To you, God is the greatness. What does it mean? When is God called great? Only when he creates the world. So that which we call God great, that's really God's smallness. That's God's speech. But by God as essence, it says everything is like nothing to God. That's what's called Bereshit, even the beginning of the creation of all of the spiritual worlds. This is just a word of God. Okay. In order that God could do this, and he could contract and conceal himself, so to speak, his light, to come down and be in God's word, which is called God's greatness. This is a tremendous descent for God. Like the rabbis say, in the place where you find God's greatness, there you find God's humility. God came down low, right? We said that before. What does it mean? Pirush she'ein lecha anava atzuma yoter. There is no humility, and how do you say, lowering yourself down more, mihashpala, than coming down to be in the world, God becoming great. Because the world is like nothing to God. So why does God make it? Why is God doing this? Why are we here at all? Maybe it would have just been better that God didn't create the world and just leave infinite reality, true reality. God concealed himself, and then concealed more and concealed more and concealed his light, and then put veils on that concealment, and then he changed the light. So it's not the same light as it was before when he created it, and etc. Why did he do it? Behold, the way he did it and the reason he did it was for the Torah and the commandments. Like the rabbis say, Bereshit Bora, that God created the world. Why? Bishvil Torah, because for the sake of the Torah. It says Bereshit, two beginnings. There were two beginnings. What are the two things that were before God created the world? Two things. There was the Torah and the Jewish people. The Torah and the Jewish people are called Reshit. Here he's just talking about the Torah. Perish, Gam, Maimer, Asifri. That's what it says also in the Midrash, Sifri. A Midrash on Deuteronomy. Perish, Parshas Azino. So, excuse me. One of the three possessions that God possessed in his world before he created the world is the Torah. The Torah is one of God's, we learned that in Pirkei Avot. Shakinyan Mora that God possesses, this shows on a thing which is very dear to God. Okay, so we have to always constantly make a reset over here to look at what's going on. Fact is that we exist. The fact is we're here. Right? The fact is we're here. Fact number two, we have no idea how we got here and how we maintain our existence and really why we're here. Why we're here. So there's all sorts of answers that are answered, in philosophy, that we're here for ourselves and we're for this. But here the Rebbe is trying to say we're here for the truth. How God is creating us, why He's creating us, it's God's business. But the fact is that we're here and that we're here for a purpose, and we have to discover what this purpose is. You can make up your own purposes if you want to, but that's not the truth. We're here for the truth. Why are we here? So it says one of the reasons that we're here is to join God in partaking of one of His possessions. What's one of His possessions? The Torah. The Torah is one of God's possessions. It's very dear to God. Now, we just finished saying that God is not a creation and He's not a being and He's not in any of the worlds. And so we obviously don't understand exactly what we're saying. But the fact is that there is a world and that there is the Torah and there is the Jewish people, and no one understands what these things are. That's one of the reasons why people hate the Jews also, because they're here and nobody knows what they are. They're like, men from Mars. Hine, behold, the mitzvahs, the commandments, are called in the Zohar 248 commandments, positive commandments. These are the 248 limbs of the king. The Torah, the commandments, are the limbs of the king. How can God have a limb? God has an arm, He has a foot, a tongue. Perish kamod derech mashal, for instance, a limb of a person which is made of flesh and sinews and bones, that these are the vessels for the life of a person that comes into them. And this is called a limb. A limb. Right? Everybody has a hand, you have a foot. Your foot carries out your will. It expresses who you are. You can't say, I didn't steal anything. My hand stole it, right? Shakespeare didn't write any of his things. His hand did it. His arm did it. That's ridiculous. His arm is an expression of him. My arm. The same thing with God. The commandments are an expression and unified with God. They're a limb of God. Kacha mitzvahs, the commandments, they are vessels for God's will. Shebahem, that through them, by means of them, is pashat or chayos, there is drawn the light and the life of God's upper will. Misoviv kol omim, that surrounds all the worlds. Liot bechinas mamalik omim, that comes into the world in a revealed way in the physical. So we just finished explaining, we had a whole big paragraph speaking about how false and unreal and what a big lie and a deception this world is. And now it's just a billion rays of godliness, and it definitely cannot be taken at face value, and that the whole thing is just a big bluff, the world, and it's incredibly low. And now we're saying, but God wants this world to be here because here is where He gave His commandments. And the upper worlds do not have the commandments. That's why it's better one moment in this world than all the upper worlds, because in this world we give God pleasure. As false and as deceptive as this world is, and unreal as it is, but only here is reflected and revealed God's true reality. And that's the commandments. Al derech she'yisbaer, like it's explained in what it says, L'yir Hashem. That's what it means that we are here in order to fear God. Namely by means of Jews doing the commandments. Like it says, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvot Torah. Okay, so this is a really good reason for a person not to want to be religious. Not to want to be religious, because we're expected to do things, commandments, and we can't see the commander at all. Who says there is such a thing as the commander? All we feel is ourselves. And the only way that we can even, be aware, or at least believe that there's a commander, is we have to have faith. We have to have faith. But also the Jewish people have this feeling inside that the Torah is true. Every Jew somehow or other has this feeling. It's covered over, it's concealed. We have free will. We can deny it. We can oppose it. And a lot of people do oppose it because the Torah seems to be the enemy of our free will. I want to do this. And because of some invisible thing they call God, is I can't eat what I want, and I can't marry who I want, and I can't do what I want. I can't say what I want. I can't even think what I want. It says thoughts about idolatry are forbidden. What's so bad about thinking about idolatry? What's so big deal? Let's just think about it. No, Torah says you're not allowed to think. Don't even think about it. Don't consider it. Thinking about thoughts that are licentious thoughts, not supposed to do it. You're supposed to try to remove your mind from these thoughts. Well, let me think what I want. What do you care? What do you care? Right? That's God. I said, no, leave me alone. I don't want these restrictions. I know these restrictions. But what does God do? See, God does a very interesting thing. Every Jew has one certain thing. Yesterday, for instance, I went and I put tefillin. I go every day to a nearby hospital. I go there only because there's a lot of people there. There's no nearby, shopping center or something. I would go there also, but there isn't any. And so I go there and I put tefillin on people. So one person, the first person yesterday, since the war started, I go like for half an hour at the end of every day. And every day, like 10 people put on, 7 people, 12 people. And the first person I said, would you like to put on tefillin? He said, I never put on tefillin, never, but I'm going to put on tefillin. So I said, oh, that's really wonderful. He said, you want to know why? I said, listen, let's put on the tefillin first, and then you can explain all what you want to. And I didn't want it to regret it. So he put on tefillin, and he said, I'll tell you why, because there's this lady on the television in Israel, and she's speaking very, very strongly about there's a lot of people like that, against putting on tefillin. It's a bad thing, and they want to make the whole country into religious, and we're going to be a bunch of fanatics and Moshiachists and whatever it is. And, for some reason, they can't stand the idea that the Jewish people, that there's Jews that are fanatics, and they don't mind the Hamas or the Hezbollah. They don't mind those guys for some reason. I can't understand how their minds work. But anyway, that's great. So he said, this lady talked against putting on tefillin, and it made me so angry to hear something like that. And amazingly, you came along, and I'm going to put on tefillin because what I'm trying to say is that it's ridiculous that Jews should do the commandments. Why should they do the commandments? I can understand if my father taught me to do it, but Jews should do it because God says, where's God? What are you talking about? But God always arranges it. That's just as God says, I'm going to gather you up one by one. Yilkatu echad achad Yisrael. And they gather, it's from Isaiah. Every Jew, something happens that he says, you know what, I'll do one commandment. I'll do it because of this. I'll do that. I hate Judaism. I hate this. But, to put a mezuzah, that I'm willing to do. To give charity, okay. The Torah is called blood. The Torah is blood, and this is like the soul. So the commandments are the limbs, and the Torah is the blood. This draws down life into the limbs. And interestingly enough, the enemies of Judaism, the first thing they always strike at is the commandments. To do away with the commandments. No more commandments. Right? All the other religions, only Judaism has commandments. There's no other religion that has commandments. They have rituals, they have customs, they have whatever it is, holidays, they have whatever is practices, but they don't have commandments. Only Judaism has commandments. What is commandments? Direct will of the Creator to us. It says the commandments, those are the limbs of God. And of course, who does the commandments? We do. When I do a commandment, I give charity, then my limbs become the limbs of God. That's how God, and the Torah, that's the blood. And the Torah is the blood. That's the whole thing of the Torah. This gives life into the commandments themselves. That's the Torah of Adam. Aleph Dam. We said this before, remember, in the word of our Malchut. So that's what it means to fear God. To fear God means that even though that we don't understand God, and even though that we don't see God and we don't perceive God, but somewhere down deep there, we're aware that it's the truth, that God really is creating us. It's the truth. God really did take the Jews out of Egypt, and he really did give us the commandments. And he's giving it, and he's creating us right now, and he's giving us the commandments. That's this fear. And when that happens, that a person does the commandments, and the commandments are the limbs, we become one with God, so to speak. And the Torah we learn, that's the blood that goes into the commandments. It keeps it alive. That's what it means. Zosa Torah Adam. Aleph, Dam. Dam, we said, is the Torah. Aleph is oneness of God, and Dam is blood. But together, that's Adam, man. Hein, that they are the Perushi, that's the explanation. The Torah is the explanation of the commandments and the detail of the laws of the commandments. Mitzvahs, how the mitzvahs should be. So here we have Judaism. It's so tremendously high. We just finished explaining that this whole world is like nothing to God, and God is infinitely higher than all the spiritual worlds, higher than all the spiritual worlds. And how does this come down? That a Jew puts little boxes on his arm. Come on, really? I mean, we're supposed to take this seriously? He says, yeah. Why should I take it seriously? Fearing God, a healthy fear of God. It's like a person naturally drives on the right side of the street. Why? Try one time, drive on the wrong side of the street. I'll get an accident. So you get an accident. What's going to happen? There'll be a cat. There'll be a smash. I'll die. You ever got smashed? You ever died? No, but I saw pictures. That's other people. That's not you. It's a natural thing. Fear, there's a healthy fear. Healthy fear means you want to do the right thing. Sometimes it's even called conscience. Conscience, right? Are you afraid of to go out and kill people? You're afraid? No, my conscience bothers me. I can't do it. I'm not allowed to kill. I don't want to kill people. Why not? Come on. Right? I'm quitting. I'm quitting the mafia. I don't. My conscience bothers me. Right? You're going to go worried about going to hell. Maybe that's it, but that's not the point. The point is that what I'm doing right now, it's not the right thing. That's called fear. And that you sense that there's some sort of truth, and that I want to be connected to that truth, and I don't want to do what I want. I want to do what's true. That's called fear. That's what we call the trademark of Judaism. That's why we have a kippah. Kippah is called Yireh Melka, fear of the king. Now we can understand what the rabbis say. A person who learns the laws of the sacrifices, it's as though he sacrifices, as though he makes the sacrifice. We don't have a temple already almost 2,000 years. Like it says, Zota Torah Ola, because when you learn the Torah, that is the same thing as making the sacrifice. I mean, in the time of the temple, it wasn't. But, it wasn't. You had to actually do it. But it's the same thing now. Overall, pasuk it says, "Ubakom makom muktar mugash bishmi mincha tahora elu talmidei chachamim." It says they're the pure incense which is given to me, and those are the people who learn the Torah. It says, im kain malas Torah zu adifa. Why is the Torah if so better than the commandments? The commandments are just limbs, and and the Torah is the blood, and the Torah, it says, is like pure incense to God. Well, the Torah is just the explanation of the commandments. 1 second, it says that when you learn the laws of the sacrifices, that's like making sacrifices. So the Torah is in a way better than the sacrifices. The sacrifices were only done in the time of the temple. Then there was an altar. And it says nowadays the place of the sacrifices are those who sit and learn Torah. Learning Torah, that's all the time. But and not only that, not just in Jerusalem, but every place and every time. And so we see that the Torah somehow or other is more eternal than the commandments are. The commandments can only be done in certain conditions. The Torah also can only be learned in certain conditions, but the conditions are much less. So you're not supposed to learn Torah in the toilet, for instance. But that's very rare. But the commandments, for instance, the sacrifice is only in the time of the temple. There are certain commandments that we won't be able to do until Moshiach comes. And even then, the commandments that were done in the temple were only done by the Kohanim, right? The sacrifice themselves. They came also in all the commandments of the Torah. Yesh ben Shetuluyim. There are some commandments which depend on time, like Shabbat, Shofar, Sukkah, Lulav. They're only done in a time, and at certain times. But if they're not done in their proper time, then there's no commandment. If you eat matzah, right, and you make a blessing on eating matzah, now you're not doing a commandment at all, which is not the case learning Torah. Learning Torah, this is a commandment all the time. And when you learn the Torah, it's as though you did the commandment. So if so, what does it mean? It says the reason is because the Torah is more eternal. The Torah is like the blood. The Torah is like the blood, and blood, which draws limbs to all of draws life to all of the limbs equally, which is not the case. The commandments, these are individual limbs. So a person can still live without God forbid, without an arm, a leg, an eye. This can still live, but he can't live without blood. On the other hand, each limb has its individual function, which is not the case. The blood's function is everywhere equally to enliven the whole body. So that's like the Torah. The Torah enlivens Judaism in a general way. That's the inner life. And the commandments, that's the expression of this. As we're going to talk about more tomorrow, we're getting to the point of understanding a little bit of what happened at Mount Sinai. That God, so to speak, put himself into this low world, and the world suddenly flipped over and became the highest thing. As we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's do the Dvar Malchut.